Hello, Team Watercrest. So today's course is a personal course for me, and that's the Blueberry Pie Experience. And thank you for being brave enough to actually click on this course and open it and view this course, because you're probably thinking, wow, I've heard this story before, and you likely have. And I hope that you will listen to it today with fresh ears, perhaps, but also I hope that you will share it with associates of yours that perhaps haven't heard this story, because this story has so much meaning, not only to me, but I think to our senior living industry itself and to Watercrest, because there are better ways to create experiences for our customers. And my mother's buying story is probably a pretty typical buying story. So I'm wearing pink today for Mom, and this is being shot in October, which is Breast Cancer Awareness Month, by the way. Ladies, get your mammograms, get your mammograms. And I told Mom during October after she passed away, or I told her before she passed away, I would wear pink often during October because she was a breast cancer survivor also. But let me get into the story. And this is, again, a very personal story, a story I may or may not cry my way through. We'll see how it goes. My dad passed away in April of 2014 in a small town called Bowling Green, Kentucky, right on the Kentucky-Tennessee line. And that's where my mother and father had lived for about 40 years. My mother was a hospital administrator. My dad was happily retired. And when Dad passed away, Mom had just retired from her hospital administration job 2 weeks before his death. Timing was not good, because my mother's social life, which Mom was very, very introverted, her social life revolved around her colleagues at work, and mostly during work hours. Mom just was not that social. So when Dad passed away and Mom found herself a recent widow, retiree, her life had changed dramatically. And immediately I started talking to her about moving to Louisville, where I live, maybe moving in with us, but definitely shopping for senior living as an option. And Mom kept saying, no, she'd be fine, she'd be fine. And for 18 months, we played that game. She said she was fine. I knew she wasn't, but after 18 months, Mom did call me with some words that I'll never forget. And she said, Michael, I'm ready to start shopping. I don't want to spend another winter alone here in Bowling Green. I was excited to begin the shopping process for my mother. And we agreed on a strategy where she would come up most weekends, and for 2.5 months, we actually visited 11 senior living communities here in the greater Louisville, Kentucky market. The Blueberry Pie Experience tells the story of those 11 encounters we had. And before we get into the story, let me share just a couple of interesting, and I use that term loosely, facts about Mom's shopping, about our shopping. First of all, only 3 communities out of the 11 bothered to follow up at all with myself, with my mother, and with my sister, who accompanied us on most of the experiences we had in senior living communities. That's fact number 1. Fact number 2 is that in 4 of the 11 communities that we visited, no one was there to help us. No one was at the front desk, so we just walked around. And not once did we get challenged. Our industry needs to be better than that. And the community where Mom chose did do a great job of follow-up, did do a great job in creating an experience, and we'll get there in just a moment. But let me walk through some of the earlier experiences that we had. Community number 1 was fairly disastrous. And I didn't have high expectations for this community, but I wanted Mom to get a feel for what a senior living community might look like and might feel like. You can follow along, by the way, in a document called the Blueberry Pie. This is a document that an assistant of mine with another company actually wrote for me, and it's a wonderful transcription of this experience that we had, or the experiences that we had with my mother. So back to community number 1. It was very short. It was very much a generic tour. And after we walked out, after about 20 or 25 minutes, my mother turned to me in only the way a mother can talk to a son and said, how dare you? This is the industry that you're in? That wasn't good. And I said, Mom, you're right, that wasn't good, but I wanted you to get a feel for senior living, and I promise you the next experience is going to be better. And it was, but only marginally. You see, the next experience that we had was with the community. In fact, I can look out my window here and almost see the community. It's that close to where I live. And the community is, the executive director there is a lady named Karen, who's a lifelong friend of mine and has known my wife a very long time, and they have a very close relationship. And I had high hopes for this community as being the community for my mother. we showed up the day of our experience, and Karen, the executive director, who I have trained, by the way, she's been through a training program with me, she actually did give us an experience, sort of. It was not great, but it wasn't terrible. It was more than a tour, but less than what I had hoped for. We walked out of that community, and my mother turned to me, and I asked her the question, what'd you think of that place? And she said, well, it was better than the first one, but it was so dark. And I said, dark? And she said, yeah, it just felt dark in there. And I said, Mom, I actually think that community has a lot of natural light. I think it's one of their strong suits. And she said, I wasn't talking about the light, Michael. I was talking about the feel. So Karen, the executive director, chief sales officer, didn't provide that feel that my mother was looking for. Now, let me ask you a question. How quickly do you think this personal friend of mine, someone who I had trained, really close friend with my wife, how quickly do you think she followed up with us? The answer is she hasn't. And this is all the way back in 2016, folks. That was 8 years ago when we were shopping at this community. I did see Karen socially a couple of times after my mother had happily moved into the community where she did live. And Karen actually asked me one time, she said, I am so sorry, or said to me, I'm so sorry your mother didn't choose us. I really wanted her to live in our community. And all I could think about was, did you? Because if you really had wanted my mother to choose your community, you would have given her much more of a meaningful, memorable, and unique experience. And she didn't. I did share with Karen where Mother lived, and she said, oh, I'm so disappointed she didn't choose us. But all I could think about was you didn't even do the basics of follow-up, creating an experience, all the basic tools that we would look for. Anyway, I'm over it. Community number 3, 4, 5, they were pretty, I don't even remember them. I don't remember much about them anyway, except they were very generic, tour-driven. And my mother's frustration level was growing. I could feel it. Community number 6 was our first life plan community. And this community is a huge campus with 6 physical plants on that campus. And this sales director, who I'll never forget, he walked us through every inch of that campus. It took us well over 2 hours to complete the entire experience. He had that velocity and volume mindset that I'm going to show you everything and just hope something sticks. It didn't work. He was the first person to follow up with us, and when we have more time, I'll share that follow-up. It was not good follow-up. It was harassment follow-up, but at least he followed up, so I guess I have to give him some kudos there anyway. But my mom actually had just bought a Fitbit before we went to community number 6, and she looked at it and she said, Michael, I walked 1.6 miles. And my mother was never a crier, but there were tears in her eyes. Not a good experience, but this sales director was convinced that if she showed my mother every aspect of the community, Mom would choose that community. She didn't. Mom was much more savvy than that, and I was not happy with the experience that we had had. But let's get to community number 7, because that's where my mother actually did choose, where she lived the last 4 years of her life, and the experience was exceptional. So let me share every aspect of this, and I want you to listen to this carefully with 2 things in mind. First of all, try to pick out the areas or the actions that this community did for my mother that were atypical and lent themselves to creating a meaningful, memorable, and unique experience for my mother. Secondly, ask yourself the question as you hear this story, is there any parts of that story, of that experience, that my community is incapable of also leading, of also conducting? I hope the answer is no. So take this next part of the story as your next steps, your homework to create meaningful, memorable, and unique blueberry pie experiences for your customers as well. So let's get into the story. The appointment was on a Tuesday at 1 o'clock. I'll never forget it. The sales director's name was Kelly. And Kelly has also been trained by me with another company. Kelly actually called me the night before, which was the very first atypical action that I hope that you will note. Kelly called me the night before and said, hey Michael, I know you're coming in for the experience tomorrow, but I wanted to ask you a few questions about your mother, and I heard your sister's in town also, so she'll be here. But I wanted to ask you some questions about your mother so I can prepare my team to create an experience like no other. I said, Kelly, I'm happy to answer your questions. And maybe for the next 5 minutes or so, Kelly asked me questions about my mom. she hung up the phone and she said, Michael, I'm going to create an experience. Your mother's going to love it. And I said, Kelly, I can't wait to see it. And I did have high hopes for this experience. We showed up the next day at 1 o'clock, and as we walked into the door, we noticed beside the door a huge sign. The sign said, Welcome to the Marlowe family. It was on a big chalkboard. It was written in colored chalk, in calligraphy. I didn't even know these things were possible. But as we walked in, my mother commented on the sign and said, Isn't that nice? And they also spelled our name correctly. Many people misspell Marlowe, another story for another time. But we walked into the community. My mother had a smile on her face, and Kelly was standing there waiting for us. And Kelly gives me a hug and shakes my mother's hand and shakes my sister's hand and introduces us to Claire. And she says, Claire's the one that made your chalkboard this morning to welcome you to our community, Mrs. Marlowe. And my mother said, Thank you, Claire. I really appreciated that. And they chatted away for a few minutes. I thought this experience is already going well, and it's already very different than the first 6 experiences we had in the other communities. Kelly immediately squired us off into what she called the discovery room. And for the next 45 minutes out of an hour agreed upon sales call, Kelly just basically asked questions of me and my mother and myself. Those of you who remember the 70-30 rule, Kelly was following it to the letter. It was fantastic. But 5 minutes into that 45-minute discovery session, there was a knock at the door. And we all looked up, and there was Isaac. 6 feet 7 inches tall. I'll never forget Isaac, all in his chef's whites, had the big white hat on his head called a toque. And Isaac said, Are you the Marlowe family? And my mother turned to me and she said, How does he know our name? And I said, Mom, just go with it. And we all said in unison, Yes, we're the Marlowe family. And Isaac looks at my mother and says, You're Mrs. Marlowe, correct? And my mother said, I am Mrs. Marlowe. And Isaac said, Well, my name is Isaac, and I'm the executive chef here at the community. I heard through the grapevine, Mrs. Marlowe, that you love blueberry pie. Is that true? And my mother said, I do love blueberry pie, Isaac. And Isaac said, I also heard that you grew up on a blueberry farm in western Kentucky. I think the town's called Katie's. And my mother said, Isaac, how do you know so much about me? And Isaac said, Oh, Mrs. Marlowe, I have my ways. I have my ways. I baked you, and he turns around and he holds out a blueberry pie. He said, Mrs. Marlowe, I baked you a blueberry pie in honor of your visit today. And I hope that this is the first of many meals that I get to cook for you. It'd be my honor to do so. Now, I'm going to take this pie to the front desks. I'll give it to Claire, who I think you've already met. That way you don't have to carry it around. But Mrs. Marlowe, it's been nice to meet you. Nice to meet you, Marlowe family. And Mrs. Marlowe, I hope you enjoy that pie. And Isaac left the discovery room. I had tears in my eyes at this point. Kelly went on with her questions, and eventually we did get up from the discovery room, and we actually did walk through the community. To this day, I couldn't tell you what we looked at in the community, because that really wasn't what was important. What was important were the interactions that we were having with the team members, Claire and Isaac. And as we ended the tour aspect of the experience, we were in the lobby and getting ready to leave, and I thought the experience was over, and Amy shows up. Amy is the director of activities and introduced herself as the director of activities. And she said, Are you Mrs. Marlowe? In the middle of the lobby, and there were probably 10 or 15 people around in the lobby. Are you Mrs. Marlowe? And my mother, very unlike my mother to ever do something like this, shouts out, I'm famous here already, aren't I? Which was really a funny moment. Amy said, Mrs. Marlowe, you are famous here already, and I know how much you love singing in the church choir. But as the director of activities, I also know that you don't sing anymore because you don't go to church, because you stopped driving. But we actually have a church choir right here in our community, and we actually practice here in our lobby every first Tuesday of the month. Now, Mrs. Marlowe, I actually printed off next month's activities calendar, and you'll notice I wrote your name, Lucy Marlowe, right here on this first Tuesday of the month. This is when we have choir practice. I hope you're here by next month, because it's going to be a really, really fun month for our residents. Now, I also know that you love to attend church, so we have church on Saturday and Sunday, so I went ahead and wrote your name on the Saturday and Sunday during next month. And I'm manager on duty during this first weekend of the month. I'll knock on your door and introduce you to all the people who come to church on a regular basis, introduce you to the pastor. You'll fit right in. It'll be great. Now, Mrs. Marlowe, here's the activities calendar for you to take, and I cannot wait for you to start getting involved in the activities here at our community. And Amy turned and walks away. I looked over at Kelly at this point as we're walking out the door, and I mouthed the words, "Thank you," to her. And she looked at me and she said, "Thank you." And we walked out of the community, and again, tears in my eyes, and I turned to my mother, trying not to show her that I was crying. But I knew what she had just been through, and I wanted to find out the impact that it had on her. So I asked her the question that I'd asked 6 times before in those other communities. "What'd you think of that place, Mom?" And strangely enough, Mom had an odd answer. Her answer was, "What do you mean, what did I think of that place?" And now Mom was bilingual, so maybe I should ask it in Spanish, I don't know. But I said, "Well, what'd you think of that place with the blueberry pie and the activities calendar?" And she said, "Well, that's where I'm going to live." Very matter of fact. I said, "So you've made the decision?" And she said, "I think I have." She said, I kind of liked it there. I was so excited. I was at a loss for words, just like I am right now. We had to get in the car, though, and drive to community number 8 because we wanted to keep our appointment. But when we got home that night, I said to my mother, I said, "So it sounds like you've made a decision? Sounds like it's Blueberry Pie Place, right?" And which by the way, she called it the entire time that she lived there. And she said, "Yeah, I think I'm most comfortable there." And I said, "Mom, can I ask you why you chose that place and why you chose it so quickly?" And she said, "Michael, wasn't it obvious? They wanted me more than the other places did, don't you think?" And I said, "Okay, I may make it through this, I may not." I said, "Mom, it really doesn't matter what I think, but I think you made a good decision. Looks like a great place for you." Mom did come back the next weekend, and we visited communities number 9, 10, and 11. I couldn't tell you a lot about them. I've kind of forgotten them. Community number 7, the Blueberry Pie Place, was Mom's choice. And we, a couple of weeks later, did sign the residency agreement. Mom moved in. Mom lived there for 4 years, and Mom actually passed away in that community. And I'll never forget that the next couple of days after we had left that community with the experience. Because not only did my mother receive 5 handwritten follow-up notes from the 5 department heads that we met that day. That would be Kelly, Amy, that would be Isaac, that would be Claire. The executive director, whose name I've forgotten, also sent her a note. But they sent it in a Federal Express envelope. In fact, my mother actually called me the day after that experience, and she said, "I got a Federal Express envelope from the Blueberry Pie Place." I said, "Did you?" And she said, "Yeah." And she opened it up, and there were 5 handwritten notes in there, all with the words "I promise" on the notes. Gladys's will always be my favorite. It's actually on my desk here in my office. And Gladys's note says this: "Dear Mrs. Marlowe, my name is Gladys, and I'm the director of housekeeping here. I'm off on Tuesday, so I didn't get to meet you yesterday. But I promise," there are those 2 words, folks, "I promise to keep your apartment exactly the way that you want it. I hope you give me the chance to prove that to you. Love, Gladys." What a powerful, powerful note from someone who became Mom's really close friend in the community. But we also received notes, as I said, from Kelly, from Claire, from all of the department heads there too. Great follow-up, creative follow-up. I love the I promise notes. I and my sister also received I promise notes from this community. So they didn't send them in Federal Express envelopes, but we got them 2 days later. What a powerful way to follow up and to show our customers that we really want them. Let me add a couple more details to the story and then we'll be done. When Mom moved into the community, obviously I was very thankful for Kelly and told her so on many, many occasions. I actually also told her, I said, I noticed when we first showed up in the community that you took my mom off to the side, and I saw that you were laughing with her, and you didn't even know my mom, but y'all were having a good laugh. Do you remember that moment, Kelly?" And Kelly said, "I do remember." And I said, "Can you remember what you were saying?" She said, "Oh, I remember exactly." She said, "Michael, remember the phone call that we had the night before your experience?" I said, "Of course I do." She said, "You shared with me that your mother was a retired hospital administrator. She made deals with people. She bought and sold small hospital chains in the southeastern part of the United States. I said, that's what she did. And she said, I told her, Mrs. Marlowe, I hope you move in with us. I really do. I hope you live here. But if this isn't the right place for you, I promise you, I'll help you find the right place. Is that a deal? You see, Kelly knew what words to use with my mother because she had done some initial discovery on the phone and knew my mother really well. Kelly also and I had many, many conversations about during my mother's 4-year stay at the community. One day I walked up to her, and Kelly, this community was 100% occupied, which doesn't surprise me at all. But I said to Kelly, I said, you know, you guys have been really successful. I said, can you tell me how that happened? She said, well, I've been through your training, Michael, which was very nice of her to say. I appreciated that very much. She said, and we do all aspects of your training. But she said, we've gotten so confident in our ability to do this, especially the 10-3-1 hot board. If you remember that from our earlier courses, we're so good at that we no longer wait for people to choose us. We choose them. We know how to motivate and inspire someone to choose our community. So all we do is do it. And when we do it, they move in. And it's a beautiful thing. I was so grateful that Kelly shared that success story with me. And it certainly worked on my mom and I. So back to my mom's 4-year stay there. I actually saw my mom the day before she went to heaven. She was doing a group activity in the memory care. She actually lived 3.5 years in independent living and then transferred to memory care. The day before she went to heaven, I went to visit her, and Mom actually told me, she said, Michael, in a very whispered voice, thank you for letting me live here for the past 7 years. Now, who was I to argue that it had only been 4 years? The dementia was somewhat profound at that point. And I said, Mom, you're welcome. I'm just so glad you enjoyed your stay here, not knowing the next day would be her last day on earth. The day, though, that she did pass away, I was back in her apartment and told all of her caregivers, I said, I will come back. It was October 2nd, 2019. I said, I'll be back every October 2nd for the rest of my life to thank you all for what you did for my mother. And I know they probably didn't think I meant it, but October 2nd of 2020, 1-year anniversary of Mom going to heaven, I showed up at the community, but of course I couldn't get in because that was during the COVID days. But I had handwritten personal notes to each one of her caregivers and had called them and asked them to come to my mother's old apartment's window. And I held the note up to the apartment glass on the window. They read the note, we cried, we touched hands together. The next caregiver came up. The first year there were 4 caregivers there that had worked with my mom, so I'd written 4 notes. The next year, still COVID, I couldn't go into the community. Only 3 of her caregivers were there, but I wrote them notes and said, I'll be back next year. Next year I did come back, and that was 2022. And that was a beautiful thing because I could come into the community, but unfortunately, none of her caregivers worked there anymore. But I asked the executive director, who wasn't the executive director when my mother lived there, but I asked him if I could just go and pray outside of my mother's former apartment door. And he allowed me to do that graciously, which I appreciated. And I will continue to do that for every October 2nd until I'm no longer in this world. I do that, and I'm praying for people like you that are watching this course right now. Because what you do, take care of mothers like my own mother, is so much giving them purpose in life. It's so important that what you do. You're heroes to me. And I hope the Blueberry Pie story challenges you to continue to constantly look for ways to improve the experience with our prospective residents and certainly continue that experience once they become residents in our community. So let me go back to the questions that I asked you to start this course. Is there any part of this Blueberry Pie story that your community is incapable of emulating? You see, folks, every customer deserves a Blueberry Pie experience, and I hope that this course will get you to recommit to creating those types of experiences, meaningful, memorable, and unique for each one of our customers, because at the end of the day, that's what they deserve, and it's the Watercrest way. Thank you for what you do, heroes, and until next time, good selling.